In 2017, Cardinal George Pell left the Vatican Secretariat for the Economy to face outrageous charges of sexual molestation allegedly occurring in his Melbourne cathedral in 1996. After a mistrial in 2018, a second trial unanimously convicted him, and he was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Cardinal Pell was then incarcerated for 404 days until Australia's High Court unanimously acquitted and released him this past April. Joining us to discuss his new book, Prison Journal Volume 1, The Cardinal Makes His Appeal, chronicling his first 5 months behind bars and more, is His Eminence, George Cardinal Pell. Your Eminence, thank you for being here.
Raymond, it's a pleasure. I've got very fond memories of EWTN.
Well, thank you for joining us. Now, Your Eminence, you wrote every day in prison as a discipline. Was it always your intention that you would publish this journal?
Not necessarily. I didn't write primarily for it to be published. I was aware that I would offer it for publication. Because it went in 3 or 4 different directions, I wasn't exactly sure whether all of it would be suitable or it would have to be edited or cut up into sections. So I was aware of the possibility, but that wasn't the primary concern.
At one point you write, quote, "My fate has serious repercussions for the Church, especially in Australia, but more widely because of my advocacy of crucifixion Christianity. There seems little doubt that my social conservatism and advocacy of the Judeo-Christian ethic have sharpened popular hostility, especially among the militant secularists. I believe in God's providence. I never chose this situation and worked hard to avoid it, but here I am, and I must strive to do God's will." What did you think God's will was for you at that time? And did you ever think you might not be released?
Well, I'm sure, I was quite sure that God's will was for me to go ahead with a bit of discipline and dignity and make the best of my situation. And once you accepted your lowly status as a prisoner, that nothing happens quickly, you're completely at the beck and call of others, it's not too bad a life. I said once or twice it was a little bit like a worldly retreat, because I had my own television set and a kettle, which at least in most of the retreats I've done, I've never had. I was sure I was going to get out, even if it was after 3 or 4 years of the 6 years, but I was never certain that I was going to win my appeal. I thought I'd win the state appeal, and so I was absolutely flabbergasted when that was voted down by 2 of the judges. So I was aware that these things weren't always decided on logic or on the evidence.
Your Eminence, when these charges first dropped, you could have declared diplomatic immunity and stayed at the Vatican. I mean, you at that time had a Vatican passport. I assume you have one now. Why didn't you just stay in Rome and avoid these charges?
Oh, because I was innocent, and that would have been very bad for me, very bad for the Church, as though I was frightened to face up to my accusers and the accusations. I never for a moment thought that I would lurk in the Vatican avoiding the charges. I went home to prove my innocence, and that's exactly what I did. Mind you, it was a long, drawn-out business, longer than I would have liked.
I'll say. Look, now you write in the book that the pedophilia crisis remains the greatest blow the Church has suffered in Australia. Now, you were responsible, Your Eminence, for setting up the Melbourne response in your home country, which was a system for victims to be able to report cases of abuse. Looking at the number of sex abuse cases globally and the cover-ups and situations like McCarrick, what should the Vatican be doing now to stop this and end this crisis once and for all?
Well, I can only speak primarily about Australia. And we broke the back of this problem in as much as we stopped the crimes in the middle of the 90s. And this was acknowledged by the Royal Commission. The Royal Commission that looked into the terrible stories of cover-up and abuse in Australia drew on almost no cases from this century. So it probably differs from country to country, but the Church, certainly in Australia, I would think in the United States, has the correct procedures in place, and we have to implement them justly and compassionately. So we're on the right track in a way that we weren't 30 years ago. We dealt with the problem the way the rest of the world did, at least in the English-speaking world, and that is cover up these things. We weren't alone in doing that. And I think we made a mistake in Australia when dealing with the Royal Commission, not to have pointed out, not to have made the point I've just made, that we broke the back of the problem in as much as we stopped the crimes occurring from the middle of the 90s.
Keith Windschuttle, a former Australian Broadcasting Corp board member and author of a book about your trial, has warned that, quote, any one of us could now be accused by strangers of reprehensible behavior and then find the weight of the nation's structures of law, government, and public opinion piled on top of us. The whole case was based on a fundamental overturning of traditions of law. There wasn't a presumption of innocence. There was a presumption of guilt. Do you agree with that appraisal of your case, the way it proceeded? And do you feel, Cardinal Pell, that you were a scapegoat for the crimes of the Church and the way it dealt with abuse in the past?
I do think Windschuttle's book is a very fine book. I have read most of it, if not all of it. I think his diagnosis is correct. If public opinion is strongly against a certain group, I think it was an example of identity politics, certainly of a spokesperson for that group. It can make it very, very difficult. I mean, I think the prosecutors in my case refused on 3 occasions to take the case forward. And that, I believe, I might be wrong, was eventually done by the police. So was I a scapegoat? To some extent. I believe that in the courts, some of my friends have reported that bystanders, some people have written to me about conversations they've had, and sometimes the conversation went like this: yes, he might be innocent, he might in fact have not done these things, but the Church deserves to be punished for the way they've dealt so badly with this crisis. And in many cases we did deal badly until the early 90s or the mid-90s.
Yeah. No, it's. I remember when we had individuals who were partial to your case and believed in your innocence, and they would come and report on various steps in the trial and throughout the process, and we got ferociously attacked by some of your countrymen in the media for how dare you have this man on, how dare you suggest that he's innocent, Cardinal Pell is a guilty man. I mean, the media pressure here was intense. You had to feel some of that even in prison.
Yes, to some extent I did, but to some extent I was used to it over the years. And I'm also very clearer than ever, that we mustn't buckle to that sort of pressure. We've got to stand up to it. We have to make our case cogently, courteously, with reason. And as I said, it is a question of identity politics, and a lot of those people don't appeal to reason. They make their decision and then condemn a person with a different point of view, and all the other people who hold that point of view too. It represents a decline in public life, the decline in rational discussion.
Throughout the journal, and I want to talk about the spiritual aspect here, you reflect on the nature of suffering. And in one entry, you write that for the first time in 70 years, you were not able to attend or celebrate the Mass. How difficult was that for you? How did you deal with that?
Well, it was difficult, perhaps not as difficult as you might imagine, because I knew that God was with me. The authorities were reasonable. They allowed me to have my breviary, the official prayer of the church, from the first night. I knew that I couldn't celebrate the Mass. There was nothing I could do to change that. So I just settled down into a daily routine of prayer. And as I said, I knew God wasn't going to abandon me because I couldn't say daily Mass.
You prayed daily, you write in the book, for victims of sexual abuse, specifically pedophilia. What do you think of your accusers now and those who are still convinced of your guilt? What would you say to them?
Well, for those who are still convinced of my guilt, I'm tempted to quote something allegedly Dr. Mannix, a famous Archbishop of Melbourne, said, and that is, everyone has a right to be foolish if they think it wise. Now, I would just suggest to those people who feel, I'm guilty, just to, say, read Keith Windschuttle's book. Look at the judgment of the High Court. We can put our case, and then people are free to accept it or reject it.
You point out that the notes you received from people around the world, quote, changed my time in jail, my daily program, my thinking, and my praying, my peace of mind. How so? And you mentioned Thomas More and John Fisher throughout the book.
Well, I received something like 4,000 letters from many, many parts of the world, many from the United States, sometimes from whole families. The children were saying that they were praying for me. One young child thought that a lady put her hand on my shoulder and said that I'd done a good job. And I thought that was a beautiful and consoling thought. But people sent spiritual poems, spiritual articles, theological articles. It was all over the place, but a lot of it was very rich and thought-provoking and good for meditation. So, and also, overwhelmingly, the people who wrote were people of deep faith, who really loved the church and were suffering with the church during these times. So it was a great consolation, first of all, spiritually, psychologically, intellectually.
You write in one section here, I think it was in April of 2019, if memory serves, about a message that was sent to you purportedly from Our Lady through a visionary named Christina Gallagher. And she wrote that Our Lady had told her that the reason the power of darkness overshadowed you with false accusations was the work that you had been doing to correct financial wrongdoing and sexual misbehavior in the Vatican. Now, you and your lawyers have made the case that there might be a connection here. Is there an ongoing investigation into possible links there? Do you think there's a link there? Well, the long and the short of it is, at the moment, people continue to be interested in the topic. Whether there's any official police investigation continuing, I don't know. I know the Victorian police are no longer following it up. I think they passed the word down that the monies went to respectable charities. I'm not quite sure that that is the case. So there's plenty of smoke, but we don't know, we don't have proof, and you have to have proof before you can make
specific claims. But I think it's highly likely that money went from the Vatican, highly likely, but just what was its purpose is not clear, except that it wasn't an official purpose linked to the official Australian Church. So we don't know. But my lawyers were always a bit sceptical about this. And they were very keen, of course, it didn't intrude into the police case, into the prosecution or our defence against the prosecution, and it didn't. But it's a story that's not over, and we'll just see. A great investigator from Wales, Christopher Friel, written 150 articles on this, and he and others keep quoting Kant, the philosopher, which says that truth is the child of time. So let's just see where we go on this.
I agree. During your time at the Secretariat for the Economy, you encountered resistance from some Vatican officials, Your Eminence, particularly Italian Cardinal Angelo Becciu, then Deputy Secretary of State, who wanted Vatican departments to continue controlling their own funds. He forced out, just as an aside, the independent auditors that you brought in, as well as the Vatican's first Auditor General. Now, in September, Pope Francis fired Becciu, accusing him of nepotism and embezzlement. Do you feel vindicated by that action and the latest revelations we're hearing out of the Vatican related to wild investment schemes and cash payments and the like?
Look, I'm not here to be the Cardinal's prosecutor. He's got a right to due process, and I think the press seem to suggest he will be charged. He has a right to his day in court. You are absolutely correct. He did arrange or insist that the international auditors be fired, and he did arrange for the dismissal of our auditor, Libero Maloney. He has more or less boasted about those things. It's a fiasco, the London business, an absolute fiasco. They've lost tens of millions. One thing I am pleased about, I had a fear that many of these schmozzles, these lapses, would remain hidden, and in 10 years' time it would become apparent, and then the same dark, nefarious forces would say, well, that was the time Pell was in charge and he did nothing. It's become quite clear how many disasters there were, and it's now well and truly on the public record how we fought regularly and strongly against these abuses. So I'm pleased, for the sake of the historical record, that a good deal of the truth is now universally known.
Your Eminence, in a recent interview, you said that the great challenge that lies before the Vatican is that it's slowly going broke. What needs to be done at this point to clean things up at the Vatican Bank? And are some of the protocols that you initially put into place when you served at the Secretariat for the Economy, are those being implemented at all?
Well, the first thing to say, the Vatican Bank is often said to be Eeyore. That's what most people think. It isn't technically the Vatican Bank. That's money from outside the Vatican. And that is basically cleaned up and is running at a profit and is well led by John Baptista Francu and by Mummy, the General Director. So that's one part of the show that's going well. My successor is honest and competent, and they're putting into place, they are implementing the procedures. There was nothing revolutionary about them. It was just best practice from around the world. They are doing that. I think they have recognized exactly where they are. And if you're in difficulties, if you can accurately chart where you are, then you have a much better chance of doing something to address them. And I certainly wish the Holy Father well. He wants to set up an investment board of experts, a small group of honest and senior and capable men, and get them to decide where all the Vatican investments should go, so we can break with this shadowy world of corrupt or semi-corrupt or dubious figures who've been circling the Vatican for decades. The Holy Father's announced, Pope Francis has announced that this is to be done. It was recommended by COSEA, the first committee that investigated. We tried to do it. I'm delighted it's being done now. And one thing we've got to do, of course, is get a good return on our investments. Nothing disproportionate or unjust, but you know, if you have 300 properties, as one agency in the Vatican does, and received from those 300 properties only 60,000 euros, obviously there's a big question mark. There's work to be done there.
Have you been asked to play a role in any of these reform protocols vis-a-vis the Vatican Bank or investments since your return to Rome?
No. Look, I'm 7 months off turning 80. Rome, as I said to someone in the last 24 hours, Rome is full of 80-year-old plus cardinals looking for something more to do. So no, I don't have any regular role at all. But the Holy Father has said if I ever want to drop him a note or make a suggestion, he's always happy to hear it. But I won't be doing that regularly, if at all.
Well, those 80-year-old
I have
cardinals,
confidence in my successors.
With all due respect, those 80-year-old cardinals don't have your track record, haven't been vindicated, and frankly haven't gone through the blades that you have to defend not only the truth, but the right path here, a transparent path for the Church at large. So with all due respect, I think your voice is needed, but I'll leave that to higher authorities than I. You reflect on retired popes, Your Eminence, in the book. And you write that the protocols on the situation of a pope who has resigned needs to be clarified. And this is what you write. While the retired pope could retain the title of Pope Emeritus, he should be renominated to the College of Cardinals so that he is known as Cardinal ex-Pope Emeritus. He should not wear the white papal soutane and should not teach publicly. Because of the reverence and love for the Pope, many will feel reluctant to impose such restrictions on someone who once held the See of Peter. Now, your thoughts on this. Do you feel having essentially two popes in play here, has that confused the populace? And what would be your recommendation then to Pope Benedict?
I wouldn't be making any recommendation to Pope Benedict. I am a great devotee of His Holiness. I very much follow his line. He was a magnificent teacher. I think he'll be a doctor of the Church. But if I could lapse a little bit, I don't think we should make it too easy for popes to resign or retire. I really think that generally the popes should remain. Now, if they're hit by a massive stroke and they can't do anything, obviously that is a time for retirement. So we're coping at the moment, but you see, we in the Catholic Church take our unity for granted. It's not. It's a miracle. It's something wonderful. Yes. Look at the situation of the Orthodox Church with churches with whom we share so much. They tried to have a church council a few years ago, and they couldn't get even some of the national hierarchies to attend. Unity is precious. We shouldn't play with it. We should be aware of what a blessing it is, and we should take appropriate measures for the future to encourage the Pope to stay, and if they do step down, that church unity is not indirectly or unintentionally impaired in any way whatsoever.
No, I think you're right. I think you're right. The Pope should die with his white zaccato on and take it to the end. John Paul was right about that. I think the confusion here is that every pope has to be as available or as globetrotting as John Paul. That, I think, was his particular charism. Every pope doesn't have to follow it. And I think there's a perception that we have to see the pope everywhere. That's not true. There were centuries where no one saw the pope. He was a figure locked away in Rome. So I agree with you. Unity is precious.
Well, and also, you see, in the early centuries, probably the primary function internationally for the Church of Rome and for the bishop that headed the Church was Rome, was to have the last word on the apostolic tradition, to be able to assure people that what they were being taught was what Christ and the apostles taught. And so, the Holy Father doesn't have to be an evangelist. It's an enormous advantage. The popularity of Pope Francis in all sorts of circles which traditionally haven't been particularly open to the Christian message is good, but the central teaching function of the papacy is to guarantee the apostolic tradition. And of course, that's one of the first tasks of every bishop. I've got no authority over the tradition. I, like you, stand under the tradition. I've got to teach it and defend it. And so every bishop has, and so, of course, is the Holy Father, which he gladly recognizes.
Cardinal Pell, what do you want people to take away from this book, and why did you decide to publish it in 3 volumes? Why not edit it down to 1?
That's a very good question, and you'd have to ask the publishers that. They decided to go in 3 volumes. I was well aware of the possibility of doing it in 1. I'm often asked whether I've been changed by the experience, and I say I can't note much improvement. But I have an even deeper conviction that the Christian package works. And so I have written these words. I believe in crucifixion Christianity. It doesn't end with the crucifixion. It certainly ends with the resurrection. So I think I offer my book for people who are in difficulty. Perhaps people might get a little bit of consolation from the basic Christian teachings, just as I did. And there's no salvation for the church in pretending that we know better than Christ, that we can somehow downplay some of his teachings, we can cut some of them out, we can improve radically. Now, obviously, theological development, doctrinal development within the tradition is over 2,000 years. It's a fact of history. But as I've said on other occasions, with development of doctrine, there are no backflips. There are no spectacular deviations or overturning. We've got a precious tradition, and we've got to defend it and explain it.
Your Eminence, what a joy to talk with you. I'm delighted that you are back among us and that these trials are behind you. I have a little family book. I wrote a little picture book, and I often say it's about finding hope in the darkest of places. But when I read your book, this is really finding hope in the darkest of places. The Prison Journal, Volume 1, The Cardinal Makes His Appeal by George Cardinal Pell, published by Ignatius Press. It's available at bookstores everywhere and online, including EWTN's religious catalog at EWTNRC.com. Your Eminence, thank you for being with us. I hope you'll come back.
Thank you very much, Raymond. I hope I'm invited.
Oh, you bet. Anytime. There's an open door. It's been refreshing and wonderful to talk with you. Thank you.